Good morning. Welcome to Plot, Character, and Voice. I'm Gary Snodgrass, and this is the second episode where I want to talk about plot today. Um, we all know what plot is. It's a series of events, usually revolving around conflict. Because if it's not revolving around conflict, it shouldn't be in the story. That lead to a change in the situation or the character, preferably both. So it's a series of events leading to a change. That's why it's important to the story. Don't forget, we talked about last time, story, the reason that we've evolved to enjoy and need story is because story in the fiction sense, but even in nonfiction when it's done in a story format, is used to create an emotion that helps the audience retain the information. We only retain information if we're relevant to the information being given to us. For instance, how to drive a car. We'll retain it because it's important to us. Or the person telling us the information is relevant to us. We care about them. We care and trust their information. And one of the ways that storytellers raise that level of relevance is by raising the level of emotion in the reader. Okay? Our long-term memory and our short-term memory are impacted by the emotions we're feeling when we have that memory. Okay? We all know this. If you look back on your life, the things that you remember normally are the things that happen to you during a heightened emotional state. Correct? So, by creating emotion, we help that information become important to the person reading or hearing the story. And plot helps that by creating a sense of a framework for that emotion to be built. I believe that there are 5 basic plots. Now then, I know that people say 7 or 30 or 220 or whatever. For me, the way I deal with it is that there are 5 basic plots. Every plot, every story that works has a question at its heart. Okay? Different question, 5 different questions. Romance. Will they or won't they get together? Mystery. Will they or won't they solve the murder? Thriller. Will they or won't they save the world and or community? Horror. Will they or won't they survive the night? Coming of age. Will they or won't they learn that they are not the center of the universe and be willing to sacrifice themselves for others? Loss of innocence. Those 5 questions drive every plot, I believe. Almost every plot. And if they don't, then there's a question as to whether it's a story, and if it's a story, if it's any good. And it's the conflict inside the story, the questioning of whether it will or will not happen, that helps to create the emotion. It's one of the things that helps to create the emotion we need for that story to resonate. Don't forget that from an evolutionary perspective, humans learn via story. We're built that way. We're wired that way. It's what makes us different. At the base level, we improve as an individual and as a species because of story. And stories improve because of plot. You need a series of events revolving around conflict to create that story, that emotion. If you don't have conflict and events, then there's nothing to hang the rest of the story on. Plot is the frame around which we create that conflict, which creates that emotion. And emotion can be all kinds of things. Love, fear, anger, wonder. It's the actual chemical released in the brain during the reading of a story that makes the story special. It's proven that people reading romance novels, that like romance novels and are into romance novels and are good romance novels, the chemical in the brain is the same chemical you release when you fall in love. You're reading a thriller, watching a thriller on movies. Your heart rate will go up. Your blood pressure will go up. Your breathing will go up. Your metabolism will actually go up. Actually, watching a thriller movie will help burn calories. Not a lot, but enough. It's your body's reacting to the story. Okay, this could be a words on a page written 100 years ago can impact your physiology today. Think about that. Okay, that's the power of stories. And the plot are the elements, the foundation for that happening. So we've got those 5 things. Romance, will they or won't they get together? Mystery, will they solve the death? Thriller, will they save the world? Horror, will they survive the night? Coming of age, will they learn to sacrifice themselves for the greater good? And if you think about it, romance, Pride and Prejudice is the classic. The whole book revolves around will they or won't they. Everything gets in their way. All the conflict stops them from it happening until they overcome it. Mystery, will they solve the murder? Think about it. Agatha Christie, Sherlock Holmes, to Seven, the current, the movie Seven. Will they solve the murder so there's no more murders? Thrillers, Born Identity, The Longest Day for a military movie, Band of Brothers. Will they save the world? Will they save the community? Horror. Will they survive the night? Halloween. Saw. 1,000 others. Stephen King does this so well is the question revolves around will they live or die? And coming of age, Harry Potter to Star Wars to Hunger Games to whatever. Will they grow up enough to be willing to sacrifice themselves for the greater good? And in my opinion, all 5 of those stories, all 5 of those plots revolve around one issue. And this is where it gets a little weird, so hang with me. They all revolve around death. The human condition is the realization that we are going to die someday. Stories help us deal with that. Either help us avoid it, delay it, come to accept it, help us realize that there are bigger and more important things. At the core human level is survival of the individual and survival of the species. That's our number 1 priority. Correct me if I'm wrong. We have other priorities, but they're not as high as surviving the moment, surviving the day, surviving the year, surviving the life, for ourselves, and the species. Those two can be in conflict. I want to save myself, or do I want to save them? Am I willing to sacrifice myself for them? And that conflict can change from situation to situation. Therefore, millions of stories. But they all revolve around death. Romance. The ultimate goal is survival. Self and species. For the species to survive, I've got to produce children that have a better chance of survival. This is at the core elemental level of our being, not at the higher level of thinking. But we all know we can overrule this, but at a biological level, we are driven to reproduce. And if you're going to reproduce, you want the best mate possible. A mate that's going to help ensure the continuation of the species. This is all at the biological level, not the intellectual level. And this is why it resonates so much. Because it's so important, because it's at the core of everything. You can be the richest person, but if you're alone or in a terrible relationship and you're unhappy, which is more important? I'll ask you, which is more important? Being rich and miserable, or being poor and happy? Now the question is, can you be happy if you're poor? That's a different issue. Mystery. There's a dead body on the ground. We are driven to make sure that that person did not die in vain. We need to bring justice. But even more importantly, at our core, at our gut, is the need to answer the question why, so that we can ensure it doesn't happen again. That's what's so important, is we want to stop future deaths. Ours, our families, our community. We're driven to do that at a gut level. Thrillers. Will they or won't they save the world? Obviously. Driven to save the species. Only by saving the species can we save ourselves and our offspring. We're driven at a gut level to do that. Horror, same thing. Will they or won't they survive the night? And if so, how? What actions do they take that we can learn from to help our own chances of survival? What mistakes do they make that increases their chance of death? And what do we do to make sure it doesn't happen again? And then coming of age. There are 1,000 different coming of age type stories. But it all revolves around the concept of the individual coming to accept the inevitability of their own death, and the decision that because of that, it is better to lead a good life. It's only through the willingness to sacrifice that we can achieve better happiness. Whether that's Harry Potter willing to give his life so that his community can survive. To accept that there are things more important than himself. One of my favorites, and this is a bit of a change in looking at things, is Dickens' A Christmas Carol. Scrooge is a coming-of-age story, in my opinion. He might be old, but he doesn't achieve maturity until he accepts that there are things in this world that are more important than himself. So it's his understanding and acceptance of his future death that allows him to grow and become a better person. as children, the world revolves around us. It has to. That's the only way we can survive long enough to mature. Our world is focused around first self, then mother, then immediate family, then immediate surroundings, and we slowly grow and push those boundaries out. But it is only when we have come to accept that there is something more important than ourselves that we have reached maturity. And even then, that can come and go over the years, but the story revolves around that fact, accepting that we're going to die someday and there are things that are more important than ourselves. So, like I said, there's those 5 plots. Now, the plot is not the same as genre. Genre, which was developed for shelving books in a bookstore, revolves around place, time, situation. Each of those plots, that I talked about, the 5 basic plots, can show up in any genre. A mystery in Victorian England, a romance in Victorian England, a thriller in Victorian England, coming of age in Victorian England, Oliver Twist, Sherlock Holmes, Pride and Prejudice, Edward, not Carolinian, coming of age, mystery, Sherlock Holmes, the Pride and Prejudice for romance, a thriller, Count of Monte Cristo, coming of age, and a thriller, he saves the community by revenge. He makes the community better by righting a wrong. Horror, Frankenstein. Question is, will they survive the night or the weeks after that? Vampire novels. Now, those 5 plots can be mixed and matched. So you can have a thriller, mystery, romance, a coming-of-age romance, mystery. All of these things combined in one. But each has, at its core, a question. Romance, will they get together? Thriller, will they save the world? Horror, will they survive the night? Mystery, will they solve the death and stop future deaths? And coming of age, will they reach maturity and grow? Those 5 plots can be in any genre. A mixture of those 5 plots can be in any genre. And by genre, I mean place, time, situation. Victorian England, 1860 England, 1860 Old West. Same time, different place, different environment. The environment is impacted by where it's happened. 1788 England, 1788 England, or 1988 England. Different time, same place. The environment is impacted by the time. Or you could have a different world, which in reality is a different time and place at the same situation. For example, underground England, 1988, filled with fairies and vampires. A world we know, but a different situation. So you could have westerns, historical genres, westerns, Regency, Victorian, Scottish, medieval, Egyptian, ancient, future, meaning science fiction, different time. You can have different place. England, Western, United States, China, a spaceship, different place. Or you have different situation, a different world, a different alternative history, a different laws of physics, meaning magical or not, but different concepts. So different place, different time, different situation determines the genre when combined with the plot. One of those plots can be in any of them. You can have a romance in space, you can have a romance in Western America, you can have a romance in China, you can have a romance in a fairy world. Or you can have a thriller in all of those. And you can have a thriller with a romance and a subplot and a mystery subplot and coming of age subplot in Victorian England filled with vampires and fairies. But I want the 5 plots are regardless of the genre. You see what I'm getting at? All genres have one of those 5 plots in them. One of those 5 plots can appear in any genre, but they're not the same thing. Okay? Now then, we keep getting back to, or what I wanted to do this all about was the why. We can get into, my next one is going to be, I want to delve into each one of those different plots, which I all talked about was related to death. But I wanted to show how each plot answers that question. Because buried inside the plot and buried inside the genres are what we call tropes. Tropes I like to define as the elements of a story that are associated with that plot and genre in such a way that they move the reader. We'll get into tropes later, but a trope is anything from the cowboy facing down the outlaws and having a gunfight. There's expectations, there's shorthand language inside the tropes, there are they are used to drive home a point. Another example is, another trope is man and woman, or man and man, whatever, a man and woman meet and sparks fly. They argue, they tease, they whatever, and later on become a couple. But it's the sparks, that the initial sparks, that is the trope. Okay? Like I said before, boy meets girl, they fall in love, they get married, live happily ever after. That's not a story. There's no conflict, there's no plot. That's an anecdote. It's the sparks, the conflict, that creates the emotion. We'll get into all of those later, but I want to illustrate the point. There's the plot, there's the genre, and there's tropes that apply across those that helps the reader meet their expectations. So the next episode we're going to talk about, we're going to start breaking down those 5 plots and how the tropes are used inside of those to move and shape a story that impacts the reader. The importance of tropes, which we'll get into here in a little bit, but the important example, okay? Young girl meets a billionaire. They have all kinds of sparks. She falls in love and lives happily ever after. Young girl meets a 40-year-old overweight accountant with 6 kids. There's no sparks. Then they become a couple. 2 different stories because the tropes don't work. Okay, it's not realistic. It's not. There's no conflict. There's no benefit. There's no solution. So we'll get into each of those. I want to go through the 5 plots and what the tropes are inside of them and why those tropes are important. Don't forget, that's what this whole vlog thing is about, is why those tropes are important. What is it about them that works? What is it about them that we want to have happen when we're listening or reading a story? And why they impact us. It's only by knowing the why that we can ever figure out the how. Okay? So we'll delve into that next time. We'll start getting into the 5 different plots. Don't forget, romance, mystery, thriller, horror, and coming of age. Those are my 5 basics. Those are the building blocks upon which I can build a story going out. At its core, every story has at least one major question. The primary question. It drives everything else. If the goal or the question is whether they save the world or not, it can have a romance subplot, but that romance subplot cannot be the most important plot. Because if it's the most important plot, they can end up getting together, but the world ends. You see? You've got, if a horror, they can have a romance subplot and a mystery subplot. They can be trying to solve the mystery. But it doesn't do any good to solve the mystery if they're killed by the killer. You see what I'm getting at? So there's got to be a core, primary question that has to be, that is, the story revolves around. Subplots are good. You could have a romance where the subplot is a thriller. Let's say, will they or won't they get together? That's the most important. And they're trying to save the ranch. They could lose the ranch and still find happiness together. Okay, you see what I'm getting at? You've got to find what the primary focus is of the story. Get it down to the basic building blocks. I look at it almost like as an upside down pyramid. Okay? There's the basic story, or the basic question. There's more questions on top of that, and more questions on top of that, and conflict on top of that, and character development on top of that, all wrapped up in voice. But at its core, there's one question, and it's one of those 5 questions. Will they get together? Will they save the world? Will they survive the night? Will they solve the murder? Or will they grow up and be willing to sacrifice for something greater than themselves? Every story, in my view, has one of those 5 at its core. Everything else after that is the difference between one story and the next. If you think about it, if there was only 5 stories, we'd be bored out of our mind. That's not what I'm saying. I'm saying there's only 5 plots. There are a billion stories. And plot is not the same as genre. Okay? Okay, thank you very much, and we'll go on to delve even deeper next time. Thank you.